For section 3.5, we're going to solve equations using the quadratic formula. So this quadratic formula is one that you're going to have to memorize. And so even though this isn't a math practice, the main thing we're going to use in this section is singing, and that will help you remember this formula. And so before we do that though, let's just make sure we have some basics down. So we're going to determine the a, b, and c for all four of these equations. So if I'm looking at this first one, 3x squared minus 4 equals 5x, I need to get everything on the same side of the equal sign first. So I need to subtract 5x over. So I get 3x squared minus 5x minus 4 equals 0. And so now I can see that my a is 3, my b is negative 5, and my c is negative 4. I'm going to go to move down below that one. This is already there. All these numbers are on the same side of the equal sign, but this is not in the correct order, which is okay. We just need to notice that our a is right here. It's negative 1. Our b is 7, and our c is negative 11. Moving over to our top right problem. Before we can do this one, we need to subtract everything over to the other side of the equation. So I need to subtract 30v squared, I need to add 16v, and I need to subtract 1. When I do this, I get negative 50v squared minus 30v squared, which is negative 80v squared. I have 20v plus 16v, which is 36v, and negative 8 minus 1, which is negative 9. So my a is negative 80, my b is 36, and my c is negative 9. One more problem. It's very similar, but on this one, I need to subtract x squared and add 10x. So when I do this, I get 9x squared minus x squared, which is 8x squared. Negative 10x plus 10x is just 0, so that goes away. And then I have minus 4. So my a is going to be 8, my b is going to be 0, and my c is negative 4. So if I were to have you factor this problem right here, you would have to go through the AC method. I see that AC is negative 2 times 5, which is negative 10, and my B is 4. So I need to think of all my factors of negative 10 that multiply to 4, so that add to 4. So I have negative 1 times 10, negative 2 times 5, and that's all I have. Well, negative 1 times 10 is 9. That doesn't work. Negative 2 plus 5 is 3. So that doesn't work either. So there's nothing here that works. So this is not factorable. So when we have a problem that's not factorable, we must use the quadratic formula. So we're going to write out the quadratic formula, and we're going to be using a, b, and c in it, and we're referring to these numbers that are in our equations. And then after we write this, we're going to do a little bit of singing with it because that will really help us keep track of it. So the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is over to a. So if you want some really good music, some good singing along too, watch the other video that's in this module, and you can sing along to that harmonious, beautiful song. But right now you're going to be stuck with Miss Johnson's iffy singing voice. When we sing out this formula, we're singing it to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. And so it goes like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so you're going to sing that over and over and over and over again to yourself until you have this memorized. So now we're actually going to solve problems using this quadratic formula. And once again, until you have this memorized perfectly and you can say it in your sleep, I want you writing it out for every single problem. So when we go to this first example here, negative 2x squared plus 4x plus 5, first of all, I want you to write out what your a, b, and c are. So on this problem, the a is negative 2, b is 4, and c is 5. And then I want you to write out the formula. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And now I'm just going to plug my numbers into this formula. I'm going to wait for my computer to catch up with me. Okay. So I'm rewriting this whole thing, but I'm going to have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times 5 all over 2 times negative 2. So now our big task is to simplify this as much as possible. So now that I'm going to simplify it, I need to work inside of the square root first, and I need to follow my order of operations. So I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16 minus, I can go ahead and do that multiplication. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 5 is negative 40. If I'm looking at this, I see 16 minus negative 40. I know that minus a negative is actually a plus. And this is over negative 4. Now, a lot of you look at this and you think, oh, I can simplify those negative 4s. But actually, you can't. With the quadratic formula, you need to have what I call the Bermuda triangle. And the Bermuda triangle connects the outside to the denominator to the edge of the square root. So you need to have something here, here, and here that simplifies. So they all need to simplify together. And this is all because of this plus or minus sign there. So if you have something that simplifies in all three of those spots, then you can make some of those numbers disappear, which is why I call it the Bermuda triangle. So I need to just simplify this further. I'm going to erase this because I can't see very well. So I'm going to simplify further. So I have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 16 plus 40 is 56 over negative 4. I can simplify my square root. Square root of 56 simplifies to 56 is 4 times 14. So this is negative 4 plus or minus 2 rad 14 over negative 4. So now I have my Bermuda triangle. So I have negative 4, 2, and negative 4. I can simplify a 2 out of all three of those numbers. So I'm just going to move this up here. So x equals, if I take out a negative 2 from negative 4, sorry, if I take out a 2 from negative 4, I'm left with negative 2. Plus or minus, if I take a 2 from 2, I'm left with 1, so I just have rad 14. And then if I take out a 2 from negative 4, I'm left with negative 2. This is as simplified as I can get because I cannot simplify my triangle and I cannot simplify my square root. And so this is as far as I'm going to go, and this is going to be my final answer. Now, since it is a plus or minus, that gives me two different answers to this, which works because this is a 2 term, and my highest exponent is 2. All right, we have just a couple more of these to work through. So this one I have 3x squared plus x plus 25. So my first step, I'm going to say my a is 3, my b is 1, and my c is 25. And now I'm going to write out my quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And now I'm going to plug in my numbers. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times 25 all over 2 times 3. And so I'm going to simplify inside of my square root sign. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus, well, 1 squared is 1. 4 times 3 times 25. 4 times 3 is 12. And 12 times 25 is 300. And this is all over 6. So I have x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 299 over 6. And I can just take this one step further. Negative 299, the square root of that. So 290, I can't simplify the square root of 299, but I can take that negative out. So I end up with x equals negative 1 plus or minus I rad 299 over 6. And this is as simplified as I believe this answer can go. And so that is my final answer. All right, now I'm going to move on to the next one. Go ahead and try this one on your own. So pause the video, work through it, and then you can play the video and see if you did this correctly. The first thing you need to do here is get everything on the left side of the equal sign. So you subtract a 10 over. And then I need to notice that my a is 1, my b is negative 1, and my c is negative 10. And I need to write out my quadratic formula. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And now I'm going to plug my numbers in. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 10 all over 2 times 1. So be very, 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 very careful with your negatives. And whenever you plug in a number that is a negative number, go ahead and put it in parentheses. That's a good habit to get into. So as I go through and I simplify this, well, negative 1 is just a positive 1. Plus or minus the square root. Negative 1 quantity squared is positive 1. The negative 1 is inside the parentheses, and that's why it's really, really important, because I have b squared My b is negative 1, so I'm taking negative 1 times negative 1, which is positive 1, minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times negative 10 is negative 40. A negative and a negative together makes a positive, and that's all over 2. And now I'm going to simplify this. So x equals 1 plus or minus 41 over 2. 41 does not simplify, so this is actually my most simplified answer, because I do not have a Bermuda triangle of numbers to simplify either. All right, we're almost there. We only have one more problem left. When I look at this, some of you might notice that this is actually factorable. If I use my a equals 1 shortcut with the AC method, I need factors of 2 that add up to 3. Well, 1 times 2 works for that. So if I write out my factors, I have x plus 1 and x plus 2. So when I work this out, I get x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 2. So we're going to see, I'm just going to throw this over to the side for now. We're going to work this out using the quadratic formula, and we're going to see if this still works for a factorable problem, or if I get something different. All right, so I know that my a is 1, my b is 3, and my c is 2. I'm going to write out my quadratic formula. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now I'm going to plug my numbers in. So I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2 all over 2 times 1. Now I'm going to simplify this. So I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 4 times 1 times 2, which is 8, all over 2. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus 1 over 2. So at this point, I need to kind of separate this up into my plus and my minus. So I'm going to write this as x equals negative 3 plus 1 over 2, and then x equals negative 3 minus 1 over 2. So when x equals negative 3 plus 1 over 2, I'm going to do negative 3 plus 1, which is negative 2, and then negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And then negative 3 minus 1, I'm going to add the opposite. Negative 3 plus negative 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. So I got x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 2, just like over here. So if I have something that's factorable and I don't realize that and I use the quadratic formula, that's okay. I might have a few more steps to do, but eventually I'm going to end up with the same answers. So the quadratic formula is always going to work. It's always something that you can fall back on. All right. So before we finish these notes, I just want you to kind of think about these a little bit. Little reminders for factoring. So if you have two terms, and you need to factor, you have two options. Your first option is to use GCF, greatest common factor. Your other option is difference of squares. So you're going to have to notice when to use each of those. When you have a 3-term, you can always use the AC method, but then within the AC method, you have a couple of those shortcuts. So you might be able to use that A equals 1 shortcut, and you might be able to use the perfect square trinomial shortcut. If you have 4 terms, the only option you have is grouping. You have to factor by grouping. So when you have a problem in front of you and you're trying to figure out how to factor it, you should look at how many terms you have, and then within the terms, figure out which method you need to use. All right, that's all for this section, and that's actually the last section in this unit. So go ahead and do your homework and get your homework finished, and we'll get it graded. And we'll spend the next couple class periods reviewing and practicing these problems, and you will have a test on Tuesday.